Story 1. Every time my mom uses the perfume she has been wearing since her 20s. She is now 80 years old. Story 2. The sound of a mourning dove's call is so distinct and brings me back to the mornings at my grandparents' house when dew glistened on the grass in the early sun. There was such a peaceful feeling there that I don't think I have experienced as an adult. Story 3. Cow manure. The natural kind. I lived next to a farm run by my uncle. The smell reminds me of home. Story 4. Honeysuckles had some outside our duplex at a very young age, and when I smell them, I am back in Tulsa. Story 5. Brown paper towels. The smell sends me back to preschool snack time. They always served our snacks on top of those. Now in my 30s, I still think back to that moment whenever I wipe my hands with one in a restroom. Story 6. The smell of freshly baked chocolate muffins reminds me of the times my mom and I used to make them together every week. She always let me add all of the chocolate chips. Story 7. The smell and taste of banana fajesicles remind me of stopping at my uncle's corner store with my dad after visiting the park. Story 8. The smell of freshly cooked bacon reminds me of Christmas mornings from my childhood. We didn't have it often, but my mom always made it in the morning, and we enjoyed a large breakfast while opening our gifts. Story 9. The smell of dust and diesel in an old pickup truck, with the hot sunshine hitting my stomach as I sit in the passenger seat and crickets chirping outside in the long grass, feels like instant time travel. My mother's perfume, the scent of old bookstores and libraries, and the hot, sweltering aroma of the long, dry grasses of the African bushveld resonate with me every time. As for taste, there are too many to count, but unfortunately, many flavors just don't taste the same anymore. Time, change, capitalism, health, and life have diminished the appeal of many treats for various reasons, and so many of the flavors of the past no longer exist. Story 10. The smell of goats, especially in the heat, reminds me of my childhood in the desert. My grandparents always had goats, and that scent brings back memories of us getting out of the car and running inside to see them. Story 11. There is this Vaseline lip balm I used to apply during high school. For me, it takes me back to my high school days. Story 12. The smell of the yellow dial soap bars takes me right back to my grandmother's house when I was about 6 or 7 years old. Story 13. Canned peas remind me of my elementary school cafeteria, and it is not a pleasant memory. Story 14. Definitely the taste of Blue Cool Pops. We devoured many of these when they were 10 pence in our local corner shop, along with hot lips and banshee bones too. Story 15. The smell of garlic and onion being sautéed is comforting. Most Sundays, my mother would make a massive meal, which reminds me of comfort and the simplicity of childhood, away from adult responsibilities. Story 16. There is a specific soap that I rarely smell, but it is usually found in restaurant restrooms. It is the same soap they used in my kindergarten restrooms, and when I smell it, I feel like I am getting ready for snack time. Story 17. Oddly enough, cigarettes remind me of backyard cookouts where most of the adults would smoke. I smoke the occasional cigarette now, and it feels surprisingly wholesome to me at times. Story 18. The scent of untouched clothing and fabric that has been in a cabinet for ages, with bonus points if it still smells of mothballs. Story 19. The smell of Bud Light reminds me of pool days with my dad when I was a kid. I can feel the beverage cooler in my hand just thinking about it. Story 20. My grandma's favorite perfume. She passed away in late 2020, and a few years later, I received a miniature version of it. I rarely open it because I want to preserve the scent for as long as I can. That is the one fragrance I associate with her. Story 21. Sunshine-heated dust makes me think of early summer, after school had gotten out and before it got too hot and summer activities started. I was lying on the floor in our living room reading a book, and that was the smell. The window was open, there was a cool breeze, and the birds were chirping. I want to go back to that time so badly. Story 22. A paper mill has a distinct smell that is quite unpleasant, reminiscent of Brussels sprouts, cabbage, and an unpleasant odor. My grandparents lived near one, and whenever we visited them, I could tell we were getting close to their house when I started to smell it. I spent several weeks every summer there, creating some of the most enjoyable memories of my life. A bad smell that brings back great memories. Story 23. Certain cleaning product smells take me back to my middle school classrooms. The smell of cigarettes and beer makes me fondly remember my father. The smell of fireworks and barbecue always reminds me of childhood summers. Story 24. The smell of the air conditioner brings me back to my summer vacations spent at my grandmother's house as a child. Story 25. One thing I never see in these questions is, what colors take you back to a childhood memory or feeling? Sometimes I see a certain shade of purple or a mix of black with metallic or glitter elements, and I instantly feel nostalgic, recalling childhood bicycle helmets, vehicles, book covers, or other memories. Story 26. Eating ice cream on a hot summer day while the wind blows my hair and the sun makes me feel lazy evokes nostalgia. Story 27. Our local mall used to have a passageway that connected two different sections. The styling was completely different, featuring a restaurant and eclectic little shops. They eventually removed it, and now what remains is mostly hidden in the back of the shops where the entrances used to be. It had a distinctive smell that I have never found anywhere else. Story 28. Sometimes a certain smell takes me back to my youth. I wonder why I can never identify its source. I would create a candle from it if I ever discovered it and attempt to sell it, though I might only manage to sell one. Story 29. The almond-scented Cleopatra glue comes in a small pot with a plastic applicator attached to the lid. Story 30. Moldy old suitcases remind me of the smell of Christmas from my childhood, as that is where our Christmas decorations were kept. Story 31. Going into a grocery store or convenience store and smelling the metallic scent of refrigerant or dusty compressor parts, along with a hint of pine cleaner. Story 32. Some circular-shaped soft candies with a cola flavor. I used to stop by a shop after school on my way home to buy some. Back in the day, it was 32 cents for a small pack, which had a wrapper you twisted on each side. You had to pull them apart because they were always stuck together. I recently found some in an imported candy shop, priced at 75 cents per pack. Made by Haribo, they are known as roulette. There is also another pack with fruit-flavored candies, and I saw a larger size version as well. Story 33. Hopefully, nothing. My childhood was marked by unfairness, cruelty, gaslighting, and abuse. I also experienced severe to profound congenital anosmia. Story 34. The smell of cinnamon apples reminds me of my grandmother's house. The taste of homemade egg noodles in chicken broth seasoned with salt reminds me of being at my aunt's house for the holidays. The scent of dirt, grass, and the haze in the air after a summer thunderstorm reminds me of living in Mississippi. We would have great thunderstorms, and if they occurred at night, it was even better. Story 35. Recently, I experienced a vivid taste memory while watching a movie. I can't recall what triggered it, but it felt remarkably real. After some time, I remembered what it was: Blue Goo flavor burst ice cream. I used to enjoy it at Red Wings baseball games in the 1990s and 2000s. I searched for a nearby store that still sells it, and it tastes just as good as I remember. Story 36. I wish I could smell my ex's cookies just one more time. Cookies always seem to be made during the best moments. Hers were the best I have ever had. I will probably miss them and her for the rest of my life, and now I am sad. Story 37. The smell of wet concrete after a rainfall reminds me of the endless days spent playing outside with my siblings in the summertime. Chalk on our hands, the tops of our heads hotter than a freshly microwaved Hot Pocket. Our go-to as kids. Good times. Story 38. Petrichor. Walking to the beach in summer after heavy rainfall in Brittany. Whenever I smell it, I am transported back. Story 39. I experienced food insecurity and poverty during my childhood. Now, I can't tolerate the smell of powdered milk. It brings back memories of eating cereal for days with diluted powdered milk and water. Story 40. Old-fashioned wooden tobacco pipe smell. My grandfather died when I was an infant. My grandmother kept his pipe and left it on the table next to the chair he used to sit in. I would often pick up the pipe and smell it as a child, and on the rare occasions when I encounter an old-fashioned pipe now, It takes me right back to those days. Story 41. Weirdly, the smell of cow manure takes me back to my childhood often. I grew up in a dairy town in central California. The combination of over 100-degree heat and large amounts of cow manure at the dairies ensured that the smell permeated the town during the summer months. It reminds me of having school off and enjoying full days running around the neighborhood with my friends until the streetlights came on. Story 42. Christmas cookies baking in the oven make the entire house smell wonderful. They remind me of visiting my grandparents. Story 43. Tex-Mex brown gravy. I used to eat at a Mexican restaurant in my hometown on the East Coast, where I always ordered the nachos. They came with a unique brown gravy, unlike anything at other Mexican restaurants nearby. Eventually, that restaurant closed down, and about 20 years later, while on a business trip in San Antonio, I had a cheese enchilada with brown gravy. The first bite immediately reminded me of El Tios. It was dimly lit inside, with parents drinking inexpensive margaritas. Those were the best nachos I've ever had. Story 44. For me, it's not really about taste or smell, but music. Many songs inherently trigger memories of what I was doing the first time I heard them. For example, I'm 33, but when I listen to songs from Godsmack's For album, I immediately recall playing Sockem 3 on my PlayStation 2 in 2006, specifically the waterlogged mission because I spent longer than I care to admit trying to complete it perfectly. Story 45. Hear Me Out. Tar, dead fish, and brackish bay water, combined with salt air and some sunscreen. The smell of the shore in the summer. Story 46. There are so many smells I love, and I recognize many of them from my childhood. I can't pinpoint it, but my elementary school had a very distinct smell. Some days during early spring or late summer, the outdoors smells like afternoons in my childhood home, playing Pokemon Blue and Animal Crossing. Sunscreen reminds me of pool days at summer camp. My mother's perfume brings back memories of the rare mornings when my elementary school would have a pancake breakfast before classes started. She would wake me up to go in early. It also reminds me of going to summer camp early in the day. You have to pay extra to arrive earlier, and when my parents finally let me do it, she was the one who brought me. It was always exciting to be there first and see a different side of the counselors. The smell and taste of Timbits remind me of when I used to volunteer at COSI because my dad would drive me, and on Tuesdays, he'd stop at Tim Hortons to get us a box of Timbits to share. Smell has such a powerful connection to memory. It's a truly underrated sense, in my opinion. Story 47. The smell of freshly baked cookies instantly transports me back to my grandmother's kitchen, where I spent countless afternoons helping her bake and sneaking bits of raw dough. The aroma of warm sugar and butter always makes me feel cozy and loved, reminding me of my childhood. Story 48. I remember the first time I was around someone smoking marijuana when I was a teenager, and it dawned on me. So that's what that smell was. Story 49. I experienced a strange sensation, recognizing the smell of a specific city. Although I was born in a different country and on another continent, I have lived in the United States for 35 years, having left when I was a child. I returned once about 20 years ago. The moment I stepped off the plane, the smell was instantly familiar. It evoked memories of my childhood, which had been dormant in my mind until that scent triggered a flood of recollections. It was reminiscent of the scene in Ratatouille. Story 50. When you walk into someone's house and they have been making Italian food, it feels special. My mother's side of the family always had large gatherings. Walking into their homes, which hadn't been updated since the 1960s, with shag carpet, Art Deco decor, and a pump organ in the corner, except for maybe the television and refrigerator, and smelling homemade sauce and meatballs, meant it would be loud, chaotic, and full of love and amazing food. I miss it so much. Story 51. The smell of wallets reminds me of being 5 years old when my dad would pick me up for the weekend, and we would go eat at McDonald's. That was over 50 years ago, but it still brings back memories. Story 52. I remember my grandfather holding me while cutting grass on a riding mower. Now, every time I smell freshly cut grass in the evening, I'm transported back to that memory. Story 53. Fresh baked apple pie. My mom was religious while my dad was not. Every Sunday, while my siblings and I were at church with our mom, he would clean the entire house and bake an apple pie. When we returned from church, there would be a wonderful lunch, finished with warm apple pie. Story 54. Fresh sweet tea with marinated lemons that has been sitting in the fridge overnight. Pair that with a bologna sandwich and Fritos. It brings back memories of the old days at my grandma's house. Story 55. I am a Generation X individual who grew up in the 1970s. Decades later, I was in a department store when I caught the scent of an older lady's perfume standing next to me. It was profound, and I recognized it immediately. I complimented her on her perfume and asked her what it was. Charlie was the name, and I realized that's what my mother wore in the early 1970s. My memory had that locked away, but it wowed me how quickly it registered after all that time. Story 56. The smell of a suitcase that hasn't been opened in a while makes me hopeful for a trip, although sometimes it was just my mom cleaning out the basement. Story 57. I stuck my head into my child's trick-or-treat bag filled with candy and took a deep breath. That and Play-Doh. Story 58. The smell of very old furniture, like the ones my grandma had, is unique and instantly brings back nostalgia, reminding me of my childhood. I miss her a lot. Story 59. Eating the pre-meal bread rolls at Applebee's unlocked a memory for me. When I bite into them, I immediately smell the taste of the asthma medication I used as a child. It's hard to describe the smell, but it's exactly that. Story 60. It's specific and somewhat unpleasant. Wet cat food when you're about to do the dishes. My grandmother loved animals. She had many cats and dogs. This unusual smell reminds me of her and how much I miss her. Story 61. The mix of cigarette smoke, leaded fuel, and hot rubber. I grew up going to the races, and once in a while, my lawn care professional smokes a cigarette, and it almost hits all the right notes. Story 62. Burning rubber takes me back to when I was about 4 years old, playing on the linoleum floor with a small wind-up car that would overheat if you wound it up and launched it repeatedly. It's strange that every time I smell it, the image of that car, the floor by the front door, and the light coming in through the glass storm door flashes in my mind. Every time. I'm almost 40. Story 63. Pure grape juice. Not apple grape juices or grape drinks, just grape juice. My grandfather used to let me have a glass when he made wine. I can still smell it 45 years later. Story 64. Freshly baked bread immediately takes me back to running around my grandma's kitchen, where she would let me help, which mostly involved stealing pieces of dough and pretending I was a professional baker. Story 65. Coffee cookies have been very popular in Ukraine. As a child, I used to eat them often and loved them so much. However, at the age of 6 or 7, my parents stopped buying them for some reason. Now I'm 22 and don't live in Ukraine, but last month, my relatives sent me 2 big packs of coffee. As I opened them, a strong feeling of nostalgia washed over me. The smell was fantastic, and the taste, with a pleasant flavor of baked milk, was a masterpiece. For me, they are the most delicious cookies that have ever existed. So if you ever come to Ukraine, you must try them at least once. I assure you, you'll fall in love with them as much as I did. Story 66. There's a distinct smell and feel in the air in Washington that occurs just before summer weather arrives. It always takes me back to my childhood and teenage years, as that meant summer vacation and biking around town with my friends. Fall has a similar smell and feel. It evokes memories of Halloween, which are often not fond ones. Story 67. Blueberry muffins have a smell and taste that always takes me back to my teenage years. Snickerdoodle cookies remind me of my childhood spent at Grandma's house during Christmas. Story 68. Freshly cut grass always reminds me of rolling down the hill in front of the house on my grandparents' farm. Story 69. Chorizo cooking on a Saturday morning. I woke up to that smell almost every weekend I spent at my grandmother's house as a child. Story 70. Sesame oil is what we used to oil and salt our own seaweed when I was little, around 3 to 4 years old, to pair with rice. Sesame oil remains one of my favorite scents. Story 71. The smell of rented NES cartridges as you blow in them turns out to be just the fact that smokers rented the games, resulting in a lingering odor of smoke. Story 72. Those sugar cookies from the grocery store, with the icing and soft texture, and the little ice cream cups we enjoyed with wooden spoons, often gnawing on the spoons more than the ice cream. Story 73. Copenhagen chewing tobacco will always smell like my grandmother to me. She dipped for pretty much her whole life, I believe. When I was growing up, it wasn't unusual for her to have a can of snuff next to wherever she was sitting, and there were cans stashed all over the house. Her home always smelled like a combination of deep-fried grease and Copenhagen. When she passed away, my mom, my now ex-husband, and I were going to stay at the house before the funeral. My aunt had cleaned the house very well, to the point that it didn't smell like Mama's house anymore. It smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and other products. Before the funeral, I walked up to her casket and kissed her on the cheek, just like I had done 1,000 times before. I told her, "It's okay. I'll be okay. I'm a big girl and I can look after myself now. Okay?" That night, after the funeral, I woke up in the middle of the night because it felt like a plug of tobacco had been shoved up my nose. I could smell it so strongly that I wondered where the scent was coming from. I chose to believe it was my mama, checking up on me and making sure I was really okay. Even now, almost 20 years later, whenever things are at their worst, I can still smell Copenhagen around me, even though I don't use that product and never have in my entire life. I find it disgusting, but to each their own. I believe that's my grandmother, trying to comfort me from wherever people go after they die. Story 74. The smell of fresh sawdust makes me hungry. Our kitchen was in the middle of renovation for a long time. My dad only had time to work on it during the weekends. Story 75. Black walnut. There was a large patch of them in the alley behind my house where we used to play. We threw the nuts at each other and dyed things with the husks. Story 76. There is no real taste or smell. However, when it is partly cloudy and warm, there is a breeze and the clouds move in front of the sun, creating a cycle of shadow and sunlight. This reminds me of the best day I had as a child. There were no worries or suffering, just spending time at the kitchen table, looking out the screen door into the backyard. Story 77. I am immediately transported to the past, my grandmother sitting on a stool in front of the building, while I rode my bike to the sound of cicadas and the scent of the evening blooms. I miss you, Grandma. Story 78. YSL opium takes me back to my childhood before my dad left and my mom had a massive stroke. I remember sitting in my mom's room watching her get ready for their anniversary dinner. She did her hair and makeup, and my dad played some music while he waited Eric Clapton's Wonderful Tonight. The atmosphere was relaxed and happy, which was rare in our household, and I felt a sense of joy. She was the most beautiful woman in the world, and I miss her every single day. Story 79. Crepes with Nutella will always remind me of the time spent with my cousins at my aunt's house when we were children, and she would make crepes. Story 80. Preschool smell. I cannot describe it, but occasionally I catch a whiff of it while I am out, and it instantly brings me back to my childhood. Story 81. I love the smell of fresh rain when it hasn't rained in a long time. There's a term for it, but I can't remember it right now. It makes me feel peaceful. Story 82. The smell of a daycare reminds me of my preschool. Now that I am a teenager, I find that memory nostalgic whenever I enter a daycare. Story 83. Spray paint. My parents used to own a wrought iron store, and I spent summers in their garage watching my mom and dad spray paint the pieces that came in. I love the smell of spray paint. Story 84. The smell from the inside of a purse took me by surprise. My wife asked me to get something for her from her purse once, and I caught a whiff. It instantly made me think of my mom. My wife and I used to smoke, so the scent of her cigarettes mixed with the leather almost made me cry. It was shortly after my mom had passed away. Although I hadn't experienced that smell in a couple of decades, a wave of sadness washed over me, and I couldn't immediately identify it. I took another whiff and remembered rummaging through my mom's purse because she used to buy butterscotch candies and always left some inside for me to find. I shared this memory with my wife, and she began putting butterscotch candies in her purse, and I would look for one and smell her purse. We don't smoke anymore, and she hasn't put those candies in her purse for well over a decade. I'm about to cry now, knowing I'll probably never experience that smell again. Anyway, I hope you're having a good day. Story 85. The smell of fresh baked cookies instantly transports me to cozy afternoons in my grandmother's kitchen. It brings back memories of warmth, laughter, and the comfort of home. Story 86. This is a strange memory, but the smell of my dad's sweater reminds me of my youth in Texas. Story 87. The smell of primary school halls is distinct. I believe it is primarily the scent of the cleaning products, yet the high school where I work has a different aroma. Story 88. The smell of the rain or the dirt on the walls is strange because they say that when I was little, I used to eat the dirt off the walls. I do not even remember it. Story 89. Blue Nivea lotion and rose perfume. That's what my grandma's dresser smelled like when I played with her hair curlers. Story 90. Christmas trees, blooming daphne, caramel corn made in a copper pot, Nantucket briar perfume, and floor wax paste. Story 91. Coconut. I tried making icing using vanilla extract but accidentally used an entire bottle of coconut extract and ended up getting sick all over the kitchen. I have not had anything coconut related since. Story 92. The memory of a smell. Purple Ditto ink. It's not something I've smelled in decades, but I can remember the scent, and it takes me back quickly. Story 93. Flowers, specifically roses and carnations. My mother passed away unexpectedly when I was 13, and she was just 42. She was deeply loved in our community, and when she died, the flowers kept coming. They filled our house, and the fragrance permeated every space. I couldn't escape it. Now, when I smell flowers, it transports me back to those difficult first weeks. For me, it's the scent of death and grief. Story 94. Creosote mixed with the smell of the lake. My aunt's deck was made of railroad ties, and her house was situated by the water. I have many memories of drinking Sprite on that deck during a swim break on the 4th of July. Story 95. The smell of those tiny, cute erasers shaped like anything adorable, crayons, and hot dogs that actually taste like hot dogs. Oscar Mayer uncured wieners have a silly name, but they taste exactly like I remember. The smell of hose water, nickel nips, and the scent of chlorine in your hair is familiar. Boat exhaust and lake meat fit into both categories, combining taste and smell. I nearly drowned once, and I got the water in my mouth, nose, and lungs. Bleg. Story 96. Cody loose face powder always reminds me of my grandma. I bought some so I could sniff it sometimes. Story 97. French fries when there are no French fries. Some diesel engine cars and trucks from my childhood ran on used cooking oil, which smelled glorious each time they passed by. Story 98. This is a unique experience, but there is a specific plastic smell that Super Nintendo controllers, including reproductions, all seem to have. It always brings me back to my childhood. Story 99. Mothballs remind me of my grandmother's basement, where my brother and I would play when we were children. Story 100. When I was about 5, I attended a summer day camp and came home with a severe second-degree sunburn on my entire back. It was horrible. The pain and itching were intense. The treatment involved being covered in arnica cream, and I walked around smothered in it for weeks. Nearly 4 decades later, the smell of arnica cream is so strange for me that I sometimes detect it in situations where it is impossible for any to be present, such as in my own bathroom, where I assure you there has never been, is not, and never will be any arnica cream. I swear that the itching starts the moment I catch a whiff of it. Story 101. For many people, the smell of freshly baked cookies or a specific type of childhood snack can evoke powerful memories. The sweet, comforting aroma often reminds people of home, family gatherings, or simpler times. The taste of something like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or even a favorite fruit can bring a flood of nostalgic feelings. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.